Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
Welcome back to Superhumanize, where we explore the frontier of what it means to truly thrive in body, mind, and spirit. Today, I'm excited to be joined by someone who stands at the intersection of cutting-edge science and practical wellness, Dr. John Lewis. Dr. Lewis is a pioneer in the field of nutritional psychiatry and cognitive health. His groundbreaking work has expanded our understanding of how nutrition impacts the brain and has also led to tangible solutions that are transforming lives. Most notably, Dr. Lewis conducted a landmark clinical study on Alzheimer's disease, where his innovative use of an Aloe polysaccharide multi-nutrient complex led to clinically significant improvements in cognitive function, reduced inflammation, and enhanced immune responses in patients with moderate to severe Alzheimer's. This study has opened new avenues for potentially reversing the cognitive decline associated with this devastating disease. In this episode, we'll explore the very mechanisms by which the food we eat can enhance cognitive function, support immune health, and even modulate inflammation, a root cause of so many chronic conditions. We'll go into the fascinating world of plant-based nutrients and their role in detoxification, heavy metal chelation, and adult stem cell production. Beyond the science, what truly sets Dr. Lewis apart is his commitment to applying this knowledge in ways that are both accessible and deeply impactful. Whether you're a health practitioner, a biohacker like myself, or someone simply looking to optimize your mental clarity and longevity, this conversation will deliver insights that could very well change the way you think about food and health. John, I have been really looking forward to this conversation. Brain health is one of my big passions because there's a lot of people who are very focused on the body, and that's fantastic, but they often leave the brain outside of the equation. I personally have experience in my family and also in close circle with individuals who are dealing with brain issues or diseases. And it is my personal aim to live very long and to live very well. And brain health is just one of the foundational pillars for me. So I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Thank you. I'm sorry you've had people in your life dealing with brain health issues. It's interesting when you think of society today, how really from birth to death, it's all and everyone in between, people are having brain health issues. And unfortunately, as you know, from a conventional medical perspective, not really a lot can be done for people with any sort of an efficacious treatment. But I have something to share with you today and your listeners that I think will be very exciting from a nutritional perspective.
Super. And this is also what really piqued my interest when I did some research on you, John. So particularly with regards to the field of integrative nutrition and psychiatry. And I'd love to hear from you in your experience, and you have profound experience. What are some of the key nutritional deficiencies commonly observed in psychiatric patients, and how do these deficiencies impact mental health?
That's a great question. So just for clarity, I'm actually a physiologist, not a mental health professional. So I just happen to be stuck, if you will, in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Miami for, 20 some odd years. But I was approaching it from the physiological side as opposed to the psychological or the mental health side. But for example, I'm sure many people know that listen to your show that vitamin D is incredibly important. It's utilized by over 4,500 genes to our knowledge at this point. It's way beyond bone health. It's likely used by every major organ in the body, not just your bones. And so unfortunately, about 70% of Americans are either insufficient or deficient in their vitamin D status. So I would say just off the top of my head, get your vitamin D checked. Vitamin D, if you're like us living in the southern latitudes, you don't really have an excuse not to get sun exposure. That's obviously UVB radiation is your best source of the sun's energy, converting that into vitamin D in the body. But if you do live in the northern latitudes in Minnesota or Montana or even farther than that, then you probably don't get as much sunshine. And so you probably need to take a vitamin D supplement. Take your D3. It's cheap. If you're a vegan or vegetarian, you can get a plant-based source of it as well. It doesn't have to come from sheep intestines. and take your 5,000 units a day, and you'll really be your body will be thankful that you're giving it that, because vitamin D is incredibly important. In fact, it's not even a vitamin. It's actually a prohormone, the way it works in the body, but so incredibly important. It's been linked to all sorts of health issues, going back to your question about mental health and whatnot. So I would say if you're low on vitamin D, now, of course, optimal vitamin D value, that's an unknown. People argue about, should it be 50, 60, 80? I've got a friend who thinks his value should be over 100 all the time. So the optimal level is debatable, but at least way beyond 30. I mean, I tell people all the time, you should be at least, I think, a minimum of 50 nanograms per milliliter, the units. But yeah, vitamin D is incredibly important for just about every organ in our body. And unfortunately, a lot of Americans are not even remotely close to where they should be with vitamin D.
Yes, indeed. And for example, in my case, I'm very fair-skinned. I only take the sun I'm outside a lot, but I on purpose only take the sun for about maybe 10 minutes in the morning sun, 10 minutes in the evening. I burn easily, so for me, it's quite risky to spend a lot of time in the sun. So I do supplement. And I learned this because years ago, via a blood test, I found out I was quite deficient. And so I supplemented, and within 4 weeks, my levels were fine. And interestingly enough, a dear friend of mine, she lives here in California. She spends probably 3 hours per day, according to her, in the sun, in a bikini. She loves being in the sun. She's half Spanish, half German. She takes it really well. Her skin takes it really well. She wanted to talk her German family into taking a vitamin D level test. And in order to incite them, she said, "Oh, I just went with them. We're all going to take a vitamin D test." She was so surprised to find out that she was not only low, but deficient. So, and
Wow.
this is somebody who spends a lot of time in the sun, loves the sun, pretty much gets it on all of her body. So that was really interesting to me. And so vitamin D, of course, is super important. You have been focused on something really interesting, and these are polysaccharides. I'd love
Correct.
to hear more about them, and how do polysaccharides contribute to neurogenesis and also cognitive enhancement and healing in adults specifically?
It's always a great opportunity to help people understand something that goes really counter to what they hear in the mainstream media, if you believe the mainstream media has any credibility at this point. But we've been conditioned for decades to hear, anytime we hear the word sugar, we think what? Bad, right? You immediately associate the word sugar with something bad. And yet I tell people all the time, a sugar is not a sugar. It depends on a couple of very important characteristics. Number one is the source. And then number two is its chemical or biochemical complexity or structure. So a monosaccharide like high fructose corn syrup, I think we can all pretty much agree, regardless of your position on nutrition, that's a sugar that you could put into the bad category. And I don't have any argument there. So that's a monosaccharide, or a simple sugar, the most simple form of sugar. Next, you have disaccharides. They're a little bit more complex. Those are things like sucrose. And then you have polysaccharides that are incredibly complex in biochemical structure. They're attached by these glycosidic bonds. There are hundreds, in some cases thousands, of these glycose units strung together by these bonds. And they're incredibly dense, complex materials, to the point where they cannot be fully categorized graphically. It's almost impossible to draw these things because of their complex structure. And so the ones that come from aloe vera and rice bran are on an entirely different level of something like high fructose corn syrup. So I like to tell people all the time, as not only a scientist and a writer, but somebody who's very particular about the use of our language, is to be mindful of the use of the word sugar. Because just because some talking head expert out there says sugar is bad for you, that's a very ignorant and wrong statement. So you cannot make that's just factually incorrect. There again, sugars are not sugars. So it depends on the sugar. And I like to correct people on this all the time, because just of my personality and what's actually true and how people need to be corrected. But what we've shown in our research is that these aloe polysaccharides, especially, I would put the ones from aloe probably at the top, and the ones from rice bran number two. I would put those really up against just about anything else that Mother Nature provides for us in terms of a health promoting benefit or effect. And in our clinical trials in people with both moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease and people with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, we've published effects that are just literally without comparison. And I hope I don't sound like an egomaniac when I'm talking this way, but it's true. There's really not much else out there that would show a similar effect. For example, in our Alzheimer's study, again, these were people with moderate to severe disease severity. So you're talking about really sick people. They were on average 79.9 years of age. And they didn't just have Alzheimer's, right? They had hypertension, dyslipidemia, depression, diabetes, other forms of heart disease. These were very old, very sick people. And we put them on our formula for 12 months. We conducted neuropsych or cognitive function testing at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. And then due to limits in our budget, we were only able to draw blood at baseline in 12 months. But at 9 and 12 months, we showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive functioning according to the ADAS-Cog, which is widely considered to be the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, particularly in people with dementia. Now, obviously, brain health, when you say brain health, you have to use a proxy of what that actually means. So in most cases, we talk about cognition being the primary way that you would assess someone's brain health. You can't just go into the brain and poke around and see how all the components of it are functioning. You have to use a proxy method like something like cognitive function. And again, the ADAS-Cog has been published, I don't know, in thousands of papers over the last 50 or so years. But anyway, that finding was and still today, we published that first paper in 2013 in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. There has been nothing since then, nothing before then. Literally, you can talk about a diet, another dietary supplement, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, music therapy. I don't care what type of therapy or intervention you want to talk about. And certainly forget the 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia, but nothing else has showed that kind of finding. And just to be very clear, there is a distinction, and I mentioned it, between clinically and statistically significant. So you can have a study that has hundreds or thousands of subjects or assessments or whatever, and due to the law of large numbers, you will find something statistically significant. That's just by chance alone. If you have a huge number of anything in your study, you'll find something statistically significant. But does it have any clinical or practical meaning or relevance? That's the question. In the case of the ADAS-Cog, if you demonstrate a change in either direction, going up or going down of more than 4 points, that is considered to be clinically significant. And that's what we showed at 9 and 12 months. So again, that kind of an effect is just unheard of. I had caregivers in the middle of the study that would call me up randomly and say, or even staff members, "Oh, Dr. Lewis, I can't believe what my loved one is now doing, talking about things, remembering things, even pointing out like directions and doing things that in some cases, some of these people had not done for years." And it was very powerful to get this kind of feedback. One of the most interesting anecdotes was the oldest lady we had in the study. She was 93, and I believe she had been diagnosed at that time for about 11 years with Alzheimer's. So she had already lived not only to be very old, but to live for a very long time with the disease, which is not typical, as I'm sure many of your listeners know. And so when she was enrolled in the study, she could not walk. She was in a wheelchair, and she didn't speak at all. And so we enrolled her in the study, or we felt like we really wanted the sickest of the sick people to benefit from this. And at one point, she came into the center after she'd already started on the supplement, and she walked in that day and she called one of the coordinators by his first name. And that guy started crying like a baby. It was so emotionally powerful for him. And I'm getting chill bumps now. Every time I tell this story, I always get chill bumps, but it was just so powerful to see that kind of a response, even knowing that that lady was basically on her last legs, so to speak. But the fact that she actually could walk again and she called him by his first name, it was so incredibly moving. And so that was just a really amazing, for me, that was at the point in my academic career, that was like the pinnacle. I just couldn't believe what we were finding, I was optimistic. I was hopeful that the study would show something beneficial and positive based on all the work that we'd done up to that. And my colleague, especially Dr. McDaniel, who got me into this whole line of research, but it was beyond anything I expected, quite frankly. And then on the cellular side, on the physiological side, we showed statistically significant improvement in overall immune function according to the CD4 to CD8 ratio. That's your ratio of your helper to your cytotoxic T cells. That's a very important ratio for all of us, actually, not just people with Alzheimer's disease. We showed reductions in two key inflammatory markers, two proteins that are commonly looked at in heart disease and cancer, TNF alpha and VEGF. We showed nice reductions in both of those. And then we showed an improvement of just under 300% of CD14 cells, which are a marker of adult stem cells. And so remember, again, these were people that were 79.9 years of age on average, and we were able to bump up that CD14 stem cell production by just under 300% over that 12-month period. All of these changes were just remarkable.
Yes, that is absolutely incredible. And I have so many questions that I'm sure are also in the minds of a lot of the listeners. So question number one is, you talk about these incredible changes. So not just on a scale, numbers, 4 points, but the actual effect it has on an individual's life, like with the lady who could walk and who could mention the name of the caretaker. And this, of course, also reverberates throughout the families and the communities of these individuals' lives. It not only touches one person. So that is incredible. With that being said, have you been able to observe with the individuals that have had a longer life? Have you kept in touch? Have you seen that there is a betterment, progressive bettering of their situation in some cases? Like, what is the breadth of the changes that you have witnessed? Does it go further?
Please remember, in research, you have a budget that supports a timeline. And in our case, you have to get what's called institutional review board approval for a dedicated, specific timeline that you're conducting the interventions. We had a set time, which was 12 months, which, quite frankly, that is a very long time to conduct a clinical trial with a dietary supplement, even though you're not changing someone's diet or exercising them or doing other things. You're introducing a variable into their life, basically one extra variable. But we were only able to really study those people for that 12-month period. Now, I can tell you, after the study ended, and some of these people were not very well off either. These were, I don't want to say poor people per se, but not exactly people that had a lot of extra financing. So obviously, participating in the study, they were able to get the product for free. We don't charge people to be in research. That's considered unethical. But for the people who were very encouraged about how their loved one responded and how they thought that they could continue using the product, there were a few people that I kept in touch with for probably a few more months afterwards. Again, it's in the ideal world, you would just follow those people for the rest of their lives. But the study has been over now that was back in like 2010. We're talking 14 years ago. So unfortunately, we're talking again like people at that time that were almost 80 years of age on average. I'm sure the chances are there's not even one person still alive that had participated in that study back then. But what I can tell you is that, for example, I have been on this formula myself now for over a decade. I've had my mother on it for a little over 15 years. It was around the time we started running the study when I got my mother on it. My wife started taking it when she was pregnant over 4 years ago. Our daughter, who just turned 4 a couple of months ago, started taking it when she was 6 months old. And so what I would tell you and your listeners is that this isn't just about treatment or rehabilitation. In my worldview, prevention is just as important as anything else. And you don't really know what prevents until you get to some point where you just expire or you're about to expire and you can say, oh yeah, that works. I didn't get Alzheimer's. I didn't get diabetes. I didn't get cancer. I just expired. My cells just basically stopped dividing. And so for me, that's the goal in terms of what I'm trying to do for myself and my immediate family and anybody else that I work with, prevention of these kinds of chronic diseases that are killing us in such horrible, sad numbers today, to me, is such an important goal. And so I'm not really answering your question very well, but I'm trying to just give you a way of looking at it. What I'm trying to do is, again, spread this message to get people to understand it's not just about treating or rehabilitating somebody that already has a health challenge, but it's keeping our brains healthy and our bodies healthy in the first place.
Yes, and we live in the same world, John. I am big on prevention, and I know also my audience is. So you are absolutely talking to the right person, the right people.
Right.
And something on a personal level, another esteemed guest on this podcast and a very dear friend, his name is Montel Williams. He has been battling multiple sclerosis for, I think, close to 2 decades now. So on a personal side, because you brought it up before,
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the polysaccharides and how the effects are on individuals dealing with MS?
Absolutely. So may I tell you just one other quick result from the Alzheimer's study, and then I'll jump to the MS study?
Mm-hmm.
So we've published now 4 papers from the Alzheimer's study. We just published the 4th paper at the end of 2023. And I had an idea for looking at the ratio of the pro to anti-inflammatory components of our immune system. It's called the Th1 and Th2 components. That had never been done before. And I had an opportunity to compare our data in that study with another study we ran in healthy people. And we ended up showing something really, truly profound as well. With that, we showed that people with Alzheimer's are very Th1 dominant, at least the ones in our study. In comparison to healthy adults, the Th1 to Th2 ratio for the most part was very close to 1 or unity. So you had these wildly Th1 dominant people compared to people with, or again, pretty evenly matched in terms of their pro to anti-inflammatory side. And then they had a rebalancing of 5 of the 6 ratios over that 12-month period in their Th1 to Th2 profile. And that rebalancing was correlated with improved cognitive function. So I just wanted to mention that because it was another first-time discovery and something that we continue building on. Even though I'm in business, I'm not in academics anymore, but I'm still publishing as I can. It's not really probably a top 10 priority at this point, but it's still important to be a science-based business as we are. But going to the MS, and I'm glad you asked me about that, because a lot of times I get so lost in discussion about dementia and Alzheimer's that I don't even get to the MS side. But we also ran a similar 12-month clinical trial in people with relapsing remitting MS. And obviously, they don't have as significant cognitive deficits as people with dementia do, but they also have very significant physical functioning deficits. And the other thing that I learned is that in running this study and publishing our first 2 papers is people with MS actually die from infection. Typically, they don't die from neurodegeneration or demyelination. In our study, we looked at infections, we looked at the same immune function, inflammatory markers, and then all these different physical function and quality of life measures. But we showed from baseline, on average, the people in the study had about 8 infections at baseline, and it went all the way down to 2.5 at the 12-month period. So that was a really exciting, impressive finding. We also showed very significant effects in terms of immune function and changing the inflammatory profile. We increased a protein called epidermal growth factor, and it has a very important role in remyelination. So for people with MS, they have demyelination. So that actually counteracts this demyelination that people with MS have. So that was also a very exciting finding for us. And then we looked at something called the FAMS. It's called the Functional Assessment of People with MS. It's also the gold standard for physical functioning for people with MS. Literally almost every scale in that measure was wildly statistically significant. We looked at all these other quality of life markers, depressive mood disorder markers. All of these things were wildly statistically significant. So we had incredible results and findings from our MS clinical trial as well. And then we have a sister paper from the Th1 to Th2 paper from the Alzheimer's study that's also currently under review right now with the journal. I'm actually working on the rebuttal right now, and that should be published probably within the next, I don't know, couple of months or so. But just incredible findings in our MS study as well.
That is really fantastic, John. I want to put this onto Montel's radar. I'm sure he will be fascinated by it. He, by the way, also has a really great podcast. So maybe I'll make an introduction.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
I would be grateful if you would do that. And in fact, there's a lady in I won't mention her name just because I didn't ask her for her permission, but she's a retired psychiatrist in New Mexico who's had MS for, I think she said 35 years. She listened to me give a lecture last year and she said, wow, these findings are incredible. I'd like to try your product. So she ordered it. She started taking it. And in the last couple of years, up until last year when she and I first met, she had been in a wheelchair. She'd really deteriorated a lot over that last couple of years. So she started on our product we call Daily Brain Care. And she called me up about, I don't remember exactly now, 30, 40 days later, and she started walking again.
Wow.
And she felt stronger and she's continuing to improve than she had since, I don't know exactly for how long, but let's say many years. And she was able to start getting out of her wheelchair again. So we've had incredible effects with people with obviously dementia, MS, Parkinson's, all of these major neurodegenerative diseases and disorders that, again, from a conventional medical perspective, not much can be done for these folks.
And this particularly Parkinson's hits close to home. My father has been diagnosed probably 12 years ago now. And I know that you have that's a question for a little bit further down our conversation because we are off too much, but I know you have your product also in powder form, which I think is incredible, especially for older people. And I want to talk about pills and powders and tinctures a little bit later, but I'm still too fascinated by some of the other things you mentioned. For example, the role of polysaccharides in adult stem cell production.
Yes.
Let's dive into that.
When you think about, I think when a lot of times people hear the word or the term stem cell, they think of some sort of an aesthetic anti-aging clinic, right? You think of going somewhere and maybe having some fat extracted and then having it enhanced with some nutritional or growth factors, and then you get them re-injected back into your body. And so it's either for an anti-aging purpose, or I know a lot of these clinics are using these treatments for joint issues. If you've had some sort of arthritis or other deterioration and you're trying to recover that soft tissue. In our view of the world, again, using nutrition and the body's own inherent intelligence to be able to turn those things back on. And of course, obviously, there's no cure for aging. We're going to eventually check out of this existence. But if you can keep that machine working as well as you can, then obviously that's one of the keys to not only living healthy, but to actually being alive every day. And so that for us, that CD14 finding was just enormous. And there's other research documenting that the CD14s actually have the capacity to turn into new neurons. So 20, 30 years ago, neuroplasticity was not commonly recognized. Most people thought that you were only born with so many neurons and other cells in the brain, and that was it. As you age, you lost them. And if you drank too much alcohol and didn't take care of yourself, your brain would lose its capacity in different ways. But we know now that parts of the brain can actually regenerate. And so these CD14s, going back to the study, one of the reasons why we think we saw such significant changes on the clinical side was, in fact, because of that CD14 finding. We had the overall change in immune functioning, we had a lowering of inflammation, and then we had this very profound increase in adult stem cell production. So to us, without having any imaging of the brain, we couldn't actually look at CT scans or anything in this particular study. We didn't have that level of funding, but without actually being able to look at the morphology or the changes in the brain, our working hypothesis is that those CD14s migrated to the brain, became neurons or repaired damage or did both. And then that's the reason why these people started getting functioning back.
Super. And here, of course, we're talking about the brain, which is hugely important. One of my main focuses for extending health span and lifespan. I know, because it's coming up in my brain, the question may also come up in the brains of some of the people in the audience. So aside from the incredibly positive and amazing effects on brain function, what other effects may some notice?
This is probably a good time for me to say that I don't want any of your listeners to ever say that Lewis is talking about using nutrition to treat disease. That's not what I'm saying at all. The nutritional paradigm or model is very different from the pharmacological paradigm or model. So with nutrition, as we use nutrition as a way of providing information that the genes interpret. They take in this information from the environment, they interpret that information, and then they guide the cells in how to function. And that either works to our advantage or our disadvantage. But what I can tell you is I have seen all sorts of people with end-stage cancer, for example. That's where these polysaccharides really do some amazing things. We believe that what's happening is that these these polysaccharides serve as signaling mechanisms for different subsets within the immune system, particularly the natural killer cells. And so our natural killer cells are one of our primary first lines of defense against viral and transformed cells, like cells that are mutating, and we don't want those things to turn into cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But I have seen just incredible responses with people with otherwise untreatable issues in cancer and then coming all the way back. And again, I'm not talking about treating disease. I'm talking about providing these materials that allow the body to heal itself. But much more on like let's say a less severe or less serious level, a lot of people report that they sleep better, they have better gut function. I've seen all sorts of people with all different types of gut complications or gut problems. I have a lady that had IBS, constipation, for many years. She started taking the product. She was getting ready to do like this $2,000 functional medicine workup and trying to figure out why she couldn't poop properly. Within 2 weeks of being on daily brain care, she was pooping like a champ. So, those are the kinds of things that people commonly report to us. People will feel more energetic. It gives you a better sense of just overall well-being. I cut my fingernails like once a week. It's amazing how rapidly your fingernails will grow when you take these polysaccharides. So anybody that's got like brittle or very soft fingernails, which isn't really in the grand scheme of things that big of a deal, but if it's something that's annoying to you, that could be certainly something that you'd benefit from. And then again,
sorry to interrupt, but it's not only something, it's an indicator that other things in the body are doing quite well or really well, because the body will not put any energy, anything into things that are not necessary to survive, whether it's hair, this is all my hair, whether it's your nails. So that actually indicates the body has the capacity to make the hair grow, make the nails strong, because it's not hyper-focused on keeping you alive from some other things that are going on and that are not going right in the body. So
that's right.
That's really fantastic. And I have not tried your product yet, but I'm super intrigued, and I will go onto your website after we finish the conversation, because you got me hooked. And I don't do that often. Yes. And I know also how delicate it is, and the line that one needs to toe with supplementation, nutrition, claims that cannot be made, etc. I've experienced that myself. We're also in the supplement business, so completely understood what you're saying there. What you've witnessed is incredible. And I am curious, John, how did you come across particularly aloe vera? I know in a lot of traditions, it's revered as a healing plant. I'm a little bit familiar with it. I would like to learn, how did you come across it, and what made you decide, okay, this is what I'm going to put a huge focus on?
I was very lucky. About 20 years ago, I mentioned him just a moment ago, Dr. Reg McDaniel. He's a pathologist by training out in the Dallas area. He's in his late 80s now, but the dude's brain is just unlike most people you'll ever meet in life. He's literally a walking encyclopedia. And when I met Dr. McDaniel about 20 years ago through a mutual friend, he very rapidly started telling me about all of his successes in helping people with these aloe polysaccharides. And he basically almost 40 years ago, he stopped practicing. He was running a pathology unit at a hospital in Dallas, and he was introduced to this aloe product by 8 guys that had HIV. They had no viral load, and their CD4 cells were normal. And he didn't know anything about it. He couldn't really explain it or describe it, but he thought I guess initially he basically thought it was like a prank, because he had no idea why these people were approaching him with this issue. But finally, and thankfully that he didn't take no for an answer, or actually that they didn't take no for an answer, he and his colleagues at Texas A&M started looking at what it is about this aloe that's so incredible. And you mentioned, obviously, in human history. For thousands of years, human beings have used aloe, but most people, you hear the word aloe vera and you think sunburn, cut, wound. You think of something topical. You don't think about the power of taking this stuff orally, but yet if you strip all the water out, the inner leaf gel is 98.5, 99% water. So there's a lot of material that you have to get rid of first. You first have to get rid of all that water. Then you have other nutrients, phytonutrients, elements, cofactors, metabolites. You get rid of all those things too. And then you're left with the polysaccharides. So a lot of times when people hear me lecture or talk about the research, they think, oh, I'm just going to start growing aloe vera and cut the leaves and suck the gel down. We have aloe vera in our backyard, but trust me, that's not the way to do it. But when you get these concentrated polysaccharides in the dosage that we're talking about in our research, that's where you get the real action. But going back to your question, I met Dr. McDaniel and I didn't know anything about it. I can tell you that my knowledge of polysaccharides or saccharides in general was maybe from one lecture in biochemistry in graduate school, and all I thought saccharides were for was a fuel source for cells. I had no clue how many other incredible effects that these saccharides have. And so he started telling me all these things about all the work that he and his colleagues had done in, again, cancer, HIV, different viruses, heart disease, genetic defects in children. He's even had a few children that were born as a dwarf that ended up having normal bone structure just from taking these polysaccharides. A lady that was blind, she had her vision restored. All these people with congestive heart failure that barely had any ejection fraction, suddenly they start having normal heart function again. Just, things that you cannot believe. It sounds like medical heresy. And again, talking about it in this way is potentially getting me in trouble. But again, and Dr. Reg will be the second one to say that we're not talking about treating disease here. We're just simply providing these materials to allow the body to heal itself. But after he and I met.
Quick question, because before you go on, John, what was the dosage for these in these cases that you mentioned? Was this a dosage of polysaccharides that's similar to what is in the product that you offer? Was it higher? Just very curious.
The Daily Brain Care, the powder version of it is a 2.5 gram scooper. And we were giving the people in the Alzheimer's study and in the people in the MS study about 4 scoops per day. So 10 grams per day. So in terms of your total macronutrient intake, it's a very little amount of material.
Mm-hmm. Great.
But after a couple of years after Dr. McDaniel and I had met and we were making all these plans to do research and trying to figure out how we were going to pay for it and this and that, he was giving a lecture. And again, this is before we ran the clinical trial, but he was talking about some of his anecdotal responses in dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And there happened to be a lady listening to him give this lecture. And to make a very long story short of this part of the story, she and her husband ultimately got to know Dr. McDaniel, and they decided to make a donation to research because they had lost 4 family members with Alzheimer's disease. And they asked him if he would be interested in helping run a clinical trial. And so anyway, it was only through the generosity of this one family that we were able even to run the trial in Alzheimer's and then the other trial in MS. It was only really through that mechanism, through that relationship, that all this even happened, all this life-changing experience happened. But then on the rice bran side, I met this other lady here in South Florida. She used to live in Fort Lauderdale, and this lady had metastatic thyroid cancer that had surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, the whole 9 yards, the typical case, much like my father, who got butchered by the medical system. But poor Barbara had gone through all of this hellish treatment and was still told she only had 6 months to live. Just the typical story you hear too many times today in our country. But she started taking this rice bran product. And at the point that I had met Barbara, she was already like 4 years past that 6-month prognosis. And so you can imagine what a passionate voice for rice bran this lady was. And she sent me a letter to my office. I didn't know this lady from Adam, and she's telling me, about her story and how this rice bran product had saved her life and wanted to know if I was interested in learning more about it. And so it ended up me meeting the company from Japan that makes this particular rice bran product, and we ended up running clinical trials in healthy people with HIV and people with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And much Dr. McDaniel's story, this rice bran from this company in Japan has a very similar sort of story. And so what I've been doing in my own work now is putting these materials together and trying to create the best of both worlds for both of them, because they're similar but yet different. And I feel like the two together provide people an even more exciting opportunity for healing than they would if they were just taking one or the other. But Barbara ended up living about another 4 or 5 years. So she probably lived like 9 years beyond the original prognosis. And again, this lady, just what an advocate she was. I became friendly with her oncologist over that period of time. And he said every time Barbara would come in for a follow-up, he would look at her labs and he would say, "Barbara, I don't even know how you're alive. Your calcitonin level is so high. I don't know how you're alive." And even he, as a conventional oncologist, had to admit that it was that rice bran. There was no other explanation for why she was still alive. And so I've just been a very fortunate soul. I guess you could say something about being in the right place at the right time, and having Dr. McDaniel and Barbara come into my life about 20 years ago, and they introduced me to their own experiences with aloe and rice bran. And it not only changed my career, it changed my life. It just completely took me in a direction that I didn't plan for. I had no idea what would happen for me, but now here I am today trying to educate the world as much as I can about these two plants that Mother Nature provides for us for health and healing. And that's going to be what I'm doing for the rest of if I live one more day or 30 more years, that's what I'm doing every day from here on out. And I'm the advocate. Now I'm the passionate person who's trying to spread this message of something that is so simple, so elegant, and yet so many people know nothing about it. And that's the difference that I bring. Going all the way back to what I said when we started this conversation, that's something unique and something different I can bring to you and your listeners that I'm willing to bet hardly any of you have even heard anything about any of this information or this research. But I'm just happy to share this with you today, and I hope it continues stimulating ideas. And however you want to move forward, I'm happy to do that with you.
Super. And John, in my universe, there are no coincidences, right? So this
Right.
knowledge, these people coming to you had a reason, and I can tell clearly how passionate you are about this and what an amazing advocate you are. And
Thank
I have
you.
a feeling that you will live a long life and a very good life and continue on this mission.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully I don't get run over by a bus.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that rice bran and aloe vera likely can't fix, but no, that's where conventional Western medicine is really great, and hopefully,
That's right.
if that happens, we'll get fixed up and
That's right.
continue healing ourselves and others. So, what you're sharing, and you are correct. In my case, this is new information for me, and I'm sure there's quite a few in the audience for whom this is also quite revelatory. Why is this information not more widespread?
2 words for you: money and marketing.
Yes.
We have the science. You'll probably mention this at some point to your listeners. I have close to 190 peer-reviewed scientific articles in my career. And again, I'm not really focused that much on peer-reviewed publishing anymore, but the collective amount of research my colleagues and I have conducted and then published in the scientific literature is, I believe, an incredible foundation that we stand on. So there's no question about the science, really. You're always going to have naysayers. You'll always have some guy paid by big pharma to knock down anything natural. So I don't even care about those people. I'm not even concerned about those people at this point. But our science is very solid. The products help people. So now it's just about marketing. It's about spreading the word and being authentic and just trying to share with people, hey, you may not have a clue what anything you know about aloe vera or rice bran is, but if you're open-minded enough to hear this message and read all the information that we've published, all the information we have on our website, all the the constant content that I continue putting out every day. It's very compelling and it's very powerful. And so really at this point, it's about marketing and the money to help spend on advertising and promotion. And that really is what it comes down to. I don't, that's the best way I can answer it, why it's not known all over the world at this point.
And this question was certainly no criticism intended at all. It was more in the vein of things that work extremely well, especially when they come from the natural world. There just seems to be this, oftentimes, a suppression of the knowledge going.
Absolutely.
Without going into, quote, conspiracy theories here, but
Right.
it just strikes me that is often what happens. Have you encountered any obstacles aside from the quote normal obstacles you may have as an entrepreneur and going through clinical trials, but have you had any resistance from places or people that made it more difficult to further your mission?
Oh, absolutely. This is a big reason why I'm in business today and no longer in academics. So a nice little anecdote to share with you and your listeners is that when we published that first paper from the Alzheimer's study in 2013, I literally was on top of the world. I was on cloud nine, top of the mountain, whatever you want to call it. And I thought we were on to some such exciting discovery, such exciting path that I knew that I was going to get NIH and the Alzheimer's Association to fund more research to extend all of this. I just knew it. I felt every fiber in my being saying, oh my God, John, you're on to something so exciting here. You're going to have more money than you know what to do with to extend this research. And so I tried twice with NIH and twice with the Alzheimer's Association submitting proposals to extend all of this work. And you know what I got in response? Zero. Nada, zero, nothing, zilch.
Crickets. That's awful, John. And that just speaks volumes. That silence speaks louder words could have. And it just also, it links up with that healthcare as we know it here and in many other countries is not about healing diseases, but managing diseases a long time.
Exactly. I went from on top of the mountain. I didn't go down in the valley. I was under the valley. Like I was so dejected and so angry and so frustrated. And so from 2013 to 2017 was when in 2017 in May was when I resigned full-time from academics. It took me a few years. We had all of these studies that we were running, not just in the Alzheimer's and MS and the rice bran. I had other studies running as well. I had a lot of students, a lot of people that I was supervising. We had a pretty big lab at that point, but it took me a while to transition to basically wind all of that down, and then make the decision, okay, I'm done with academics. I'm not spending the rest of my life begging bureaucrats at NIH or Alzheimer's Association or these other places to give me more money to do research. It's not a very kind way to make a living anyway. But then it was a very powerful. It wasn't a teaching moment. It was a teaching period, I guess you could say, where I really learned that regardless of what these people say on the surface about their interests in prevention, health, wellness, nutrition, all these natural things, they don't care about that because they don't have an opportunity to take a chemical that they can patent and then license that with big pharma and then make millions or billions of dollars on. That's what they're interested in. And like you said, keeping us all impaired. There's no money in healthy people. There's no money in dead people. But if you're impaired for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and you need to take some drug every day that you can't get yourself out of, you just sink down into that brainwashing or whatever state of being that is, and you just go along with that conventional approach or path, then you just basically become a number for big pharma. So I was not willing to play that role either. I had no interest in working for some pharmaceutical company, but I took the best of what my colleagues and I had accomplished and discovered, and I created that as a product that, again, we call daily brain care today. But being in business has been no bowl of cherries either. I've definitely taken a few punches to the gut, but I refuse to lose. My business is nowhere where I want it to be yet, but I refuse to lose. And I feel like I'm doing it the right way. My science is so good, and the products help so many people, and that's what's the most important thing. And so eventually my business will get to where I want it to be. But life just teaches you. You have lessons. You can call them failures or obstacles or whatever, but you have to have the wherewithal to say, okay, this is what happened. Why did I do this, or how did this happen? Let me not do this again, and just keep moving forward. And that's why there are 1 out of 10 entrepreneurs that make it. 9 out of 10 don't, but 1 out of 10 do. And I feel like I'm one of the 1 out of 10 because I'm not the smartest person, but no one will outwork me, and no one will knock down my motivation or my dedication to whatever you want to call it, my obsession or whatever this is. Nobody will take that away from me until I take my last breath.
I love that, John, and so much respect and gratitude to you, and for being such an example of that, embodying this.
Thank you.
For people who'd like to connect with you or learn more about you and also look up your products, where can they best do that?
drlewisnutrition.com is a website we've created over the last few years. It's just loaded with so much valuable, beneficial information. That's Dr. No period, Lewis, Lewis, nutrition.com. You can find us on all the typical social media channels there. We're just getting into the social media game over the last year or so. So we don't have millions or even thousands of followers at this point. We're just really trying to get that ball rolling, but you can still find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and that sort of thing. But really, drlewisnutrition.com is the best place to get all of the summaries of the research and just a lot of good information about daily brain care. And as you mentioned, in powder and in capsule form. But in addition to daily brain care, we have other products that we're now coming out with over the next couple of months. And we have...
What's coming up?
So we have daily immune care, which is a combination of the aloe and the rice bran polysaccharides with a few other really cool nutrients in that particular formula. We have berberine, tetrahydrocurcumin, EGCG, and D3 and K2. These are all enhanced with my manufacturing partners' liposomal patented technology that enhances bioavailability and absorption. So we've got some really nice technological features and advantages compared to a lot of companies out there. We're really excited about the launch of these new products, and we're going to continue innovating. Even though NIH and Alzheimer's Association had no money for me, that hasn't stopped me from ultimately planning to have more research conducted in the future. I just decided I'm not going to beg these people anymore. I'm just going to be successful enough that I'll eventually fund these additional studies myself. It's going to take me longer to do it, but that's just going to be my path. And that's what part of my goal is. So innovation is very important to continue staying ahead of the competition. And even if somebody started today, it'd be very difficult for another company to replicate what we've already accomplished. Somebody could knock off our formula. They could look at the label and read the ingredients and then come up with their own, but they won't have my story, and they won't be able to tell the story the way I can in terms of the research that we've published and this whole journey. No one can copy that. So I know we'll be knocked off at some point, but that
also means you're at a point of business where you're probably quite happy with where you're at.
That too, exactly.
John, it's been a true pleasure. Thank you for all this incredible knowledge and sharing your experience. And thank you for the passion that you have for your path. And yeah, it was really a great conversation. Much gratitude to you.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for you having me, and I'd be happy to come back on your show anytime. If you have me come back to talk about other nutrition or supplement or exercise topics, I'd be happy to do it.